The frost came late that October in the hollow below Kinnickinnick Ridge, and I remember thinking it was strange that Beatrix Colfax chose that particular morning to have my sister arrested, because frost like that usually kept everyone indoors until the sun cleared the tree line. But Beatrix had never been a woman who waited on weather or on anything else. She'd built her reputation on moving first and explaining later. And by the time most of Willow Bend Estates woke up that day, she'd already made 3 calls, 2 of them to people who had no business getting involved in a property dispute. My sister Odette had lived on the 12 acres at the bend of the creek since our grandmother left it to her outright. The kind of deed that gets photocopied and framed because everyone in the family had fought over that land for 2 generations before it finally landed somewhere it couldn't be touched. Or so we thought. Odette raised goats there, sold cheese at the Saturday market in Vansburg, and kept mostly to herself, which in a development like Willow Bend, gated 5 years old, built up right to the edge of her fence line, made her an object of suspicion simply by existing without an HOA newsletter subscription. Beatrix ran that HOA the way some people run small countries. She had a laminated binder, she had opinions about mailbox height, and for 18 months, she had been trying to convince the board that Odette's 12 acres, which predated the development by 60 years, were actually common land that had been improperly excluded from the original plat. Nobody took her seriously until the morning 2 sheriff's deputies showed up at Odette's gate with a warrant for grand theft of real property. The complaint alleged my sister had moved a survey marker in the night to steal roughly 4/10 of an acre from the development's greenbelt. I got the call while I was at my desk at the county clerk's office, where I'd worked the recorder's window for 11 years, cataloging deeds nobody reads until the day they desperately need one. My first instinct, I'll admit, was not entirely charitable toward my sister. Odette had a temper. She threatened a surveyor once back when the development first broke ground, screaming at the poor man from her porch like a garden hose was a weapon. There was a version of this where I could imagine her yanking a stake out of the ground in a fit of pique. That doubt sat in my stomach like a swallowed stone the whole drive out to the hollow. I hated myself for it, and I went anyway. The deputy who'd made the arrest, a heavy-set young man named Prosper Nwachku, who I recognized from the courthouse cafeteria, looked almost apologetic when I got there. He told me the complaint had come with photographic evidence, time-stamped and everything, and that Beatrix herself had walked it into the sheriff's office, rather than waiting for patrol to come collect it, which struck him as unusual enough that he'd mentioned it to his sergeant. I asked to see the photograph, and after some hesitation he showed me on his phone. It was grainy, supposedly showing Odette at the boundary line at 4:47 a.m. in late October with a mallet in her hand, the kind of image that looks damning until you look at it for longer than 5 seconds. I looked at it for longer than 5 seconds. The shadows fell wrong. At 4:47 a.m. in late October, the sun wouldn't clear the ridge for another 2 hours, and there was no moon that week. I'd checked out of the same professional habit that makes a person check page numbers on a plat map before signing off on it. Whoever staged that photograph hadn't accounted for the mountain blocking the light, and somebody had been careless enough, or arrogant enough, to think nobody would look that closely at a picture of a woman nobody liked. That was the first thing that didn't fit. The second came 3 days later when I pulled the original 1961 deed from the archive to settle the property line once and for all. The deed my own predecessor at that recorder's window had filed and indexed decades before I ever sat in that chair. The boundary on that original instrument didn't match the boundary the development surveyors were using at all. It matched something older, a line drawn not by a surveyor for Willow Bend Estates, but by a mining company that had once held rights to the ridge above Odette's property back when half that hollow was leased for a coal seam nobody had ever profitably worked. The 4/10 of an acre Beatrix wanted so badly wasn't greenbelt. It sat directly over the collar of an old exploratory shaft capped and forgotten, and sitting on top of a mineral rights reservation that had somehow quietly been reassigned to a shell company 6 months earlier. A shell company whose registered agent, according to the state corporate filings I pulled that same afternoon, was Beatrix's own son-in-law, a man named Desmond Opterberg, who ran a failing gravel operation 2 counties over, and who it turned out had been quietly shopping mineral leases to a natural gas broker for the better part of a year. She hadn't wanted the land for a greenbelt at all. She'd wanted whatever was still leasable underneath it, and framing my sister for theft was the fastest way to get a judge to order the property held in abeyance pending resolution, which would have frozen Odette's title long enough for Desmond's company to quietly file its own competing claim on the mineral interest, while nobody was paying attention to a woman who couldn't leave her own farm because of a criminal charge. I didn't go to the sheriff first. I went to my supervisor, and then because small counties run on relationships as much as statutes, I went to a retired title examiner named Karen Achebe, who owed me a favor from the time I'd rushed a filing for her daughter's wedding venue. Karen still had contacts at the State Mining Commission, and it took her 4 phone calls to confirm what I already suspected. The mineral reservation had never been properly severed from the surface estate in the first place. The 1961 deed had conveyed the whole parcel, surface and subsurface both, to grandmother's family. Full stop. Beatrix's shell company was building an empire on a document that didn't exist. And Desmond had apparently known it for at least 3 months before the fake photograph ever surfaced, based on an email Karen's contact happened to still have in an old file. The charges against Odette collapsed within a week once the district attorney's office saw the timestamp discrepancy and the shell company filing side by side. Normally that's where a story like this ends. A drop charge, a red-faced HOA president, maybe a fine. But Beatrix wasn't finished because 2 weeks later at the annual Willow Bend Estates meeting, She stood up in front of a packed clubhouse to defend herself, insisting the whole thing had been an honest misunderstanding about a boundary line. To prove her good faith, she invited the development's new environmental consultant, hired ironically at her own insistence 6 months earlier, to assess erosion risk near that same shaft, to present his findings live on the projector in front of the entire board and half of the county's homeowners. The consultant's report wasn't about erosion, it was about subsidence. The old mining shaft under that 4/10 of an acre had been slowly collapsing for years, and its collapse zone, according to his modeling, extended not into Odette's 12 acres at all, but 40 feet in the other direction, directly under the foundation of the Willow Bend clubhouse, where Beatrix was standing at that very moment with a microphone in her hand. The meeting ended in an evacuation. The county condemned the clubhouse 11 days later. Desmond's gas broker, once he learned the reservation was worthless, and the whole arrangement had been built on a forged severance, pulled out of the lease entirely, and according to Karen, is now the one threatening to sue Desmond for fraud. Beatrix, who had spent a year and a half trying to seize 4/10 of an acre for its buried mineral rights, found herself instead facing a special assessment from her own homeowners association, voted through unanimously by furious neighbors, to cover the cost of demolishing the building she'd been standing in when the ground beneath her literally proved her wrong. Odette still keeps her goats at the bend of the creek. The shaft has since been properly sealed, this time by the state, and the county finally updated the plat to match the deed I'd filed all those years ago. Sitting at that same window, cataloging paper nobody reads until the day it saves everything. Or if you're Beatrix Colfax, the day it buries you.